Imagine discovering your husband's deepest secret, one that not only shatters your trust, but destroys your entire family. What would you do if you found out your husband was having an affair with your own mother? Welcome to True Crime Vault, your go-to source for captivating crime stories, unsolved mysteries, and gripping investigations. A huge thank you to my amazing viewers and subscribers for your support. Keep tuning in for daily updates on true crime tales, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated. In today's story, a woman's worst nightmare unfolds, leading to an unexpected and tragic turn of events. A hidden betrayal, a confrontation, a life lost in the blink of an eye. What happens when the truth comes to light? This is a tale of heartbreak, shocking revelations, and the devastating consequences of betrayal. Brace yourself for a story that will leave you questioning everything. Grace Monroe was 34, living in a charming suburban home in Denver with her husband, Luke Monroe, and their two young children, Noah, 8, and Lily, 5. To anyone looking in, they were the perfect family. Grace, a dedicated elementary school teacher, poured her heart into raising her children, while Luke, a successful corporate lawyer, worked tirelessly to provide for them all. Their life was a picture of success. They had the house, the kids, and the dream job. Family picnics in the park, game nights, and lazy weekends by the lake were their norm. Grace and Luke had been together since college, a match made in heaven. To Grace, Luke was everything: her partner, her confidant, her best friend. They had built their life together on a foundation of love and hard work. Grace had always admired Luke's determination and ambition, and Luke respected Grace's nurturing nature and dedication to their family. They were a team, partners in every sense of the word, overcoming life's challenges side by side. Over the years, they'd become the envy of their friends and neighbors, a couple that seemed to have it all. But over the past few months, things had started to shift. Luke, once so engaged and loving, had begun to act distant. It started subtly, small changes Grace initially shrugged off. Luke had begun working late more often, even on weekends. Their evening walks, once a regular ritual, were replaced by empty dinners, with Luke glued to his phone or absorbed in work. He stopped asking Grace how her day had gone, stopped showing the interest he once had in their children's activities. Grace tried to tell herself it was just work stress. Luke's job as a corporate attorney was demanding, after all. But something inside her knew the changes were more than just that. And then came the moments of silence, moments when she felt like she was talking to a stranger, not the man she'd married. One quiet morning, after Luke had left for work, Grace found his phone sitting on the kitchen table, screen lit up with an incoming message. Normally, Grace would never snoop, but something about that moment felt different, something that made her heart race. The message read, "I can't wait to see you again," and it was from none other than her own mother, Claire. Grace's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but why was her mother sending messages like that to her husband? Her mind raced as she stepped closer to the phone, hesitating only for a moment before picking it up. It was unlocked. Luke had never been secretive about his phone. What she saw next shattered her entire world. Luke and Claire had been exchanging secret, intimate messages for months, messages filled with longing, hidden embraces, and whispered promises. They'd been meeting behind her back, sneaking around, acting like everything was fine when, in reality, they were betraying her in the worst possible way. Grace stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The world around her felt distant, as if she were living in a nightmare. How could this be real? She kept scrolling, her hands shaking, as the cool messages continued to unfold. Each line, each word felt like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. There was talk of secret meetings, stolen moments, and whispered declarations of love. Luke, the man she trusted with everything, was having an affair with her own mother. Her mind raced with disbelief, trying to process the reality in front of her. How long had this been going on? Was this the reason for Luke's distance? Why hadn't she seen the signs? The pain inside her was suffocating. It wasn't just that her husband had betrayed her. It was a deep, unimaginable betrayal by the one person she had trusted most in the world, her mother. Grace sat there, tears welling up in her eyes, as the enormity of the situation crashed down on her. She felt a tidal wave of emotions, anger, heartbreak, confusion. But most of all, she felt a cold, empty rage building inside her. This wasn't just an affair. This was something deeper. Her family, the foundation of everything she believed in, was now a house of cards ready to crumble. She knew the confrontation would come, but in that moment, she wasn't sure she was ready. Would she even be able to face Luke? Or Claire? Could she ever trust him again? The storm inside her grew stronger with each passing second, and as the hours passed, Grace's thought began to turn dark. She couldn't just let this go. She needed to understand everything. And when she did confront them, there would be no turning back. Grace had spent the entire day in a whirlwind of thoughts, her mind racing with what she had uncovered. She couldn't pretend anymore, pretend that everything was okay, that her family was still whole. As the evening wore on and the children went to bed, Grace knew it was time. The calmness in the house was suffocating, and she felt a knot in her stomach. The confrontation would come tonight. She waited until Luke was sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes glued to his phone as he scrolled through emails, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Grace walked in, her heart hammering, but her voice steady as she spoke. "We need to talk." Luke's eyes lifted from the screen, and for the first time in weeks, he seemed to notice her. "What is it?" he asked, his voice casual, trying to act as if everything was normal. But Grace could feel the tension building between them. He knew something was wrong. "I know everything, Luke." Grace's voice was quiet but strong. She paused, looking into his eyes, watching his expression change from confusion to shock. "I know about you and my mother." Luke froze. His face turned pale as he processed the words. His hands trembled as a tablet slipped from his fingers and landed with a dull thud on the table. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His mind raced, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. Grace could barely contain the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Anger surged through her like a tidal wave. She wanted to scream, to tear him apart for what he had done. But instead, she simply said, "I've seen the messages. All of them. You lied to me. You betrayed our family." Luke tried to speak, his voice strained. "Grace, it's not what you think. Please, just..." But Grace couldn't bear to hear his excuses. Every word he spoke was like another dagger to her heart. She couldn't fathom how he could be so callous, so deceitful. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "How could you do this to me? To our children?" Luke's mouth hung open, words failing him. He couldn't deny it. He knew the truth was out. The weight of his guilt and fear pressed on him, but all he could do was stare at Grace, unable to make things right. Grace turned away, feeling the deep ache in her chest. She could barely look at him anymore. Her husband, the man she had trusted with everything, was now a stranger. And her own mother, the woman who had always been her best friend, had played a part in this betrayal. The silence in the room was deafening. Grace walked toward the door, her body shaking with the intensity of the confrontation. She needed air, needed space, needed to escape from the suffocating reality that now surrounded her. But before she reached the door, Luke spoke again. "Grace, please, don't do this. We can talk about this," he pleaded, his voice desperate. But Grace was already at the threshold. She stopped, her hand on the door handle, and turned around, her face pale with fury and heartbreak. "There's nothing left to talk about," she said quietly, then walked out of the house, leaving Luke alone with his guilt. Grace stepped outside, the cold night air biting at her skin, but it did nothing to numb the pain gnawing at her heart. Her body trembled as she walked further into the yard, her mind still reeling from the confrontation. She couldn't believe this was happening. How had it come to this? Her mind kept flashing back to the family they had built, the years of love, the dreams they shared. Now all of it was shattered. Luke stayed inside, his eyes fixed on the door Grace had just walked through. The fear inside him had escalated into something darker. He could already hear the echo of Grace's voice in his head, her words accusing him of betrayal. His pulse quickened, his thoughts racing with panic. What would happen now? She'd found out the truth, and he knew she wouldn't just let it go. She would destroy him, and he couldn't bear that. His life, his career, his family, all slipping through his fingers. The air was thick with tension as Luke's desperation grew. He couldn't let Grace expose him. He couldn't face the humiliation, the inevitable destruction of everything he had built. The fear turned to rage, and in that moment, He felt a darkness take over him, a darkness that clouded his judgment and pushed him toward an irreversible decision. Grace stood in the yard, trying to catch her breath, her emotions raw and overwhelming. The darkness of the night surrounded her, but it was nothing compared to the emptiness inside her chest. As she took another step forward, she didn't hear Luke approaching from behind. He had quietly opened the door and slipped outside, his movements tense, his hands shaking with fear and fury. Before Grace could turn around, she felt a strong grip on her throat. Panic flooded her system as she gasped for air, her hands reaching instinctively to pull his hand away. But Luke was stronger. His fingers tightened around her throat, and she struggled to break free. Her vision blurred, her body weakening with every passing second. "No! Luke! Please!" she choked, her voice barely a whisper. But Luke's grip didn't loosen. The fear and rage inside him had taken over completely, drowning out everything else. He wasn't thinking anymore. He was acting on sheer desperation. Grace's body fought against him, her legs kicking and her hands clawing at his. But the strength was slipping away. Her lungs burned, her breath growing shallower, until, finally, everything went black. The night was eerily quiet, the sounds of crickets and distant city noise drowned out by the muffled gasp of breath that no one could hear. In the shadow of the house, under the dim glow of the porch light, Grace struggled to hold on to life. Her face twisted in shock, eyes wide with terror as she realized that the man she loved, her husband, was the one who was taking everything from her. As Luke stood over her, his hands trembling, his own breath coming in ragged gasps, a wave of horror swept through him. What had he done? What had pushed him to this point? He looked at Grace's lifeless face, his mind finally grasping the reality of the moment. It was too late to undo anything now. The cold night air felt suffocating as Luke staggered back, staring at her body in disbelief. His body shook, his hands still trembling, but no amount of shaking could wake Grace from her final, fatal sleep. The next morning, the first light of dawn crept across the quiet suburban neighborhood. But at the Monroe house, something was terribly wrong. A neighbor, noticing the unusual silence, peered over the fence and saw Grace lying lifeless in the yard. The phone call to police was made, and within minutes, squad cars arrived, their sirens slicing through the calm morning. Detective Olivia Johnson, a seasoned investigator known for her sharp instincts, was the first on the scene. The sight of Grace's body lying in the grass, so out of place and unnatural, struck her immediately. There were no signs of a struggle, no visible wounds, nothing to suggest a violent confrontation. But there were the marks around her neck, and the cause of death was clear: strangulation. Luke was already waiting by the front door, his eyes red and wild, his clothes disheveled as if he had barely slept. His hands were shaking, and his voice cracked as he spoke to the detective. "I found her, out back. I don't know what happened," Luke said, his tone eerily calm, but his nervousness betrayed him. Detective Johnson took in his disheveled appearance and the way he avoided her gaze. Something wasn't right, but she kept her questions measured, trying not to let her instincts cloud her judgment. As the forensic team worked to collect evidence, Detective Johnson began piecing together the timeline. Luke's statement seemed off. He claimed he'd just found Grace that morning, but the scene didn't add up. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle, and no indication that Grace had tried to fight him off. The way she was positioned suggested she had never even seen her attacker. The breakthrough came when they checked Grace's phone. Hidden in the messages between her and her mother, Claire, was a bombshell. Grace had confided in her best friend just days before her death. She had discovered the affair between Luke and Clay, and was planning to confront them both. The messages confirmed that Grace had been on the brink of exposing the truth. But it didn't stop there. Detective Johnson soon learned that the day before Grace's death, Claire had been acting strangely. When questioned, Claire seemed genuinely distraught, but her nervous gestures and the way she avoided direct answers raised red flags. She wasn't as devastated as someone who had just lost a daughter should have been. The final piece fell into place when the forensic team found traces of Grace's blood on Luke's clothing, matching the marks left on her neck. Luke's alibi, his claim of simply finding her in the yard, began to crumble under scrutiny. The evidence was clear. Luke had been there the night before, and it wasn't just an accident. As the investigation unfolded, Luke's emotional state grew more erratic. His earlier calm demeanor began to break down. He couldn't maintain the facade anymore. The weight of what he had done was slowly sinking in. His guilt began to overpower him, and the terror of facing the truth of what he had become tore him apart from the inside. Luke was brought in for questioning, his hands still shaking as he sat in the interrogation room. Detective Johnson remained calm, leaning in slightly to gauge his response. She knew he was guilty, but she needed him to admit it. Luke's eyes flickered with a mix of anger and fear. He knew this moment had been coming, but he couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. "I didn't mean to do it," he mumbled, his voice broken. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. She was going to destroy everything. My life, my career. I couldn't let her do that." The words spilled out in a broken confession as Luke's world crumbled around him. He admitted that the confrontation with Grace had escalated. His fear of losing everything had consumed him, and in that moment, he snapped. The reality of what he had done, the life he had taken, was too much to bear. As the weeks passed, news of Grace Monroe's tragic death spread like wildfire through the community. The investigation was over, and the evidence was clear. Luke Monroe was the one responsible for taking the life of his wife. The shock of the murder rippled through the neighborhood, leaving everyone in disbelief. No one could have predicted that a man so respected in his community could be capable of such a heinous act. The trial began in late October, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and family members who had once considered Grace and Luke the picture-perfect couple. The prosecution presented their case, detailing the messages between Luke and Claire, the evidence of the affair, and the damning forensic findings. The most chilling piece of evidence was Luke's confession, where he admitted to the murder, explaining his fear of losing everything. The defense, however, attempted to argue that Luke had been in a state of emotional distress. They painted him as a man who had been driven to the edge by the discovery of his affair being exposed and the impending collapse of his entire life. They argued that Luke had acted impulsively and had not intended to kill Grace. But despite their attempt to soften the charges, the jury was unmoved. The evidence was overwhelming, and Luke's actions could not be justified by emotional turmoil alone. The verdict was delivered on November 12, 2023. Luke Monroe was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 45 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the judge read the sentence. Grace's family sat in the front row, their faces a mixture of grief, anger, and relief. Justice had been served, but the cost had been unimaginable. For Luke, the sentence was a final blow to the life he once knew. His career, his reputation, and his family were all gone. He was a man now defined by a single act of violence, a man who would spend the rest of his life in a cell, far from the family he had torn apart. Claire, Grace's mother, had been called as a witness in the trial, but her guilt was clear. While she didn't participate in the murder, the affair she had with Luke was a catalyst that set everything in motion. Claire's relationship with her daughter had been irreparably destroyed. She could not escape the guilt of betraying not only her daughter's trust but the life they had built together. Claire's grief was profound, but it couldn't undo what had been done. For Grace's family, the trial brought some measure of closure, but the wounds remained deep. Her children, Noah and Lily, would grow up without a mother and now would have to live with the knowledge that their father had killed her. They were too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, but the trauma would shape their lives forever. Grace's absence left an irreplaceable hole in their hearts, one that no amount of time could heal. As for the community, the murder of Grace Monroe had shattered the image of the perfect family that so many had admired. The story of betrayal and violence haunted their small town for months. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones, still in disbelief that a man like Luke could commit such an unforgivable act. The Monroe family, once a symbol of success and love, was now a cautionary tale. The reality of the betrayal, the murder, and the subsequent legal fallout left a stain on everyone involved. For Luke, the life he had worked so hard to build was destroyed in an instant, and all that was left was a cold, harsh reality of prison walls. For Grace's family, their lives would never be the same, torn apart by a secret affair and a brutal act of violence.